Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, for listening. Sometimes a story needs to be told, not just for the person telling it, but for anyone who's ever felt invisible in their own life. Anyone who's ever been the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who quietly cleans up the messes while the celebration happens in another room. My story begins on a Tuesday, the longest Tuesday of my life, which also happened to be my 33rd birthday. The heels of my Louboutins clicked a sharp, lonely rhythm against the polished marble of my apartment building's lobby. The sound was too loud, echoing in the cavernous, empty space. It was 9 p.m. Another 14-hour workday was finally behind me. Another multi-million-dollar campaign successfully launched for a Fortune 500 client. My boss, Mr. Sterling, had practically shaken my hand off, his eyes beaming with a paternal pride I hadn't seen in my own father's face in over a decade. He saw my value. He wrote it down on bonus checks. I checked my phone again as I waited for the elevator. It was a nervous, pointless habit, a muscle memory of hope that refused to die. The screen was dark, reflecting my own tired face back at me. Christina Miller, 33 years old today, strategic marketing director, wearing a coat of exhaustion like it was Chanel No. 5. My green eyes looked hollow. 0 new messages, 0 missed calls. Not from my mother, not from my father, not from my brother. It doesn't matter, I told myself, the same lie I'd whispered every year since I was a child. Birthdays are for children. I'm a grown woman. I manage 8-figure budgets and a team of 20. I don't need balloons and cake and forced sentimentality. It was a good lie, a strong lie. I had almost perfected it. The elevator doors chimed softly and slid open. I stepped inside, the mirrored walls creating an army of tired Christinas, all looking just as lonely as I felt. I forced the thought down, buried it under a mountain of professional achievements and the mental checklist for tomorrow's 8 a.m. presentation. I was successful. I was independent. I didn't need them. But the thing about lies is that they are fragile things, easily shattered by the smallest truths. And the truth was sitting on my coffee table when I unlocked the door to my apartment. My home smelled of expensive cleaning products and nothing else. No scent of cooking, no lingering perfume of another person. It was a beautiful, sterile container for a life. The truth was a single, perfect-looking cupcake from the expensive bakery downstairs. A little swirl of cream cheese frosting on a red velvet base. I'd bought it for myself that morning, a pathetic little act of self-celebration that now felt like an indictment. A single, unlit candle stood in its center, a lonely soldier waiting for orders that would never come. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered, the words swallowed by the silence of my perfectly decorated, perfectly empty home. I dropped my leather briefcase by the minimalist sofa, kicked off the heels that were pinching my toes, and sank onto the cushions. The city lights of New York glittered through my floor-to-ceiling windows, 1,000 tiny celebrations that had nothing to do with me. The silence in my apartment wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was a weighted blanket of absence. It was the kind of silence that amplifies the ticking of a clock, each second counting down the final minutes of a day that was supposed to mean something. My phone remained stubbornly, painfully silent. I told myself I didn't care. I lied. The lie was getting weaker every year. With a sigh, I reached for my laptop, thinking I'd distract myself with work. Maybe I could refine the Q4 projections, anything to make this day officially end. But my fingers had a mind of their own, muscle memory, a traitorous instinct for connection. A few clicks, and I was on Facebook, and that's when the silence was shattered, not by a sound, but by an image that ripped the very breath from my lungs. Thank you for being here with me as I start this. It means a lot. If you don't mind, let me know what city you're listening from in the comments below. It helps to know I'm not just talking into the void. The first post on my feed froze the air in my lungs. It was a photo of my brother, Leo. He was holding a champagne flute high in the air, his face split in a wide, triumphant grin. He was surrounded by smiling faces, my family. Behind him, a professionally printed banner hung across the wall of my parents' dining room. Congratulations, Leo, on the sterling venture deal. My father's arm was draped around Leo's shoulder, his expression radiating a kind of blinding pride I'd only ever seen directed at his son. My mother stood on his other side, beaming, her hand clutching Leo's arm as if he were a winning lottery ticket. The timestamp on the post read, 4 hours ago. My birthday. My hand trembled as I scrolled. It wasn't just one picture. It was a whole album. Dozens of photos of the entire extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, all gathered on a Tuesday night to celebrate my brother. The comments swam before my eyes, the words blurring through a haze of disbelief and a familiar, bitter sting. My father, Robert Miller, had written, "So proud of our superstar. The Miller legacy continues." My mother, Carol Miller, had added, "Our son, the deal maker, setting the world on fire." They didn't forget my birthday. The thought was a cold, hard stone in my stomach. Forgetting would have been careless. This was a choice. They chose to celebrate something else instead. They chose him, again. The realization was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. And with it, the ghosts of birthdays past came rushing back, uninvited and unwelcome, clearer than ever before. I was 11 again, sitting alone at a booth at the Cheesecake Factory. I can still smell the sugary sweetness of the air. The slice of Oreo Dream Extreme cheesecake sat in front of me, a single candle melting into a puddle of black and white wax. They had promised they'd be back in time from Leo's debate tournament. They called from the car. Leo had won. They were going for a celebration dinner with the team. They'd celebrate my birthday tomorrow. They never did. I remember the waitress, a college-aged girl with kind eyes, who came over and asked if my parents were coming. The pity in her expression made me feel hot with shame. She gave me the cheesecake for free. I ate it alone, my throat tight, each bite tasting like disappointment. I was 17, my bags packed for a weekend at my grandmother's house, my birthday weekend. My parents were taking Leo to tour Harvard and Yale. "It's his future, Christina," my father had explained, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "This is important." My birthday, apparently, was not. It was an inconvenience to be managed. I was 22, standing in my cap and gown at my college graduation dinner. I'd graduated summa cum laude. I had a speech prepared, a small toast to thank them. But I never got to make it. The celebration was hijacked when Leo chose that exact moment, right after the appetizers arrived, to get down on one knee and propose to Tiffany. The conversation instantly pivoted from my honors thesis to wedding venues and guest lists. I had simply faded into the wallpaper, as always, a smiling, silent, supporting character in the movie of my brother's life. Just last month, I told my father about the Horizon campaign, the one that increased client revenue by 41%, the one that was now a case study in industry journals. He'd glanced at his watch, impatient to get to his golf game. "That's nice, honey. It's just marketing, though. Not like Leo's work in finance. That's real impact." My phone buzzed, and for one stupid, hopeful second, my heart leaped. But it wasn't a call. It was an email notification. I opened it mechanically, my eyes still stinging from the glare of my family's manufactured joy. The subject line read, "Confidential, performance bonus." I blinked, reading the message from HR. My performance bonus for the Horizon campaign had been approved. The number stared back at me from the screen, $82,000. more money than I'd ever had at one time, a tangible symbol of my success, of my value. But the validation felt hollow, drowned out by the silence from the people who were supposed to value me most. And then, as if on cue, my phone finally rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. The hope I thought was dead fluttered weakly in my chest. Maybe she remembered. Maybe she saw the date and felt terrible. "Hello?" I answered, hating the small, eager tremor in my voice. "Christina, darling!" My mother's voice bubbled through the speaker, cheerful and completely, utterly oblivious. "I'm so glad I caught you. Listen, your brother's party was such a success, but it was all a bit last minute. We're planning a proper celebration next month, a real blowout to impress his new partners. I was hoping you could help out. You're so good at that sort of thing." The catering, the decorations. The clock on my wall struck midnight. My voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, today was my birthday." A pause, a beat of genuine, unfeigned surprise. "Oh," she said. "Oh, honey, with Leo's big promotion and all the excitement, it just completely slipped our minds." Slipped their minds. Like I was a grocery item left off the list. I stared at the email still open on my laptop. $82,000. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been soft and yielding for 33 years, began to harden into something sharp and unbreakable. "Don't worry about it, Mom," I said, and the voice that came out was not my own. It was calm, it was level, it was cold. I understand what's important to this family. And for the first time in my life, I truly did. The next 4 days passed in a fog of methodical fury. I went to work, I led meetings with crisp precision, I smiled at colleagues. But beneath the surface of professional competence, a tectonic shift was occurring. The soft ground of familial duty I had stood on my entire life was cracking apart, revealing the hard, cold bedrock of truth beneath. I wasn't a daughter. I was a utility. The truth arrived in the form of a text message from my mother, accidentally adding me to the Miller Family Inner Circle group chat. I was probably meant to be a temporary addition to coordinate whatever help they wanted for Leo's next party, but they forgot to remove me, and I forgot to leave. I just watched, a silent ghost observing my own erasure. The threads sprawled across my screen like a crime scene. Each message was more damning than the last. My father: "About the celebration for Leo, we need to make it impressive. The venue alone will be $20K. Christina should contribute significantly. It's the least she can do after getting that windfall. And Aunt, she just got that big promotion, right? She can certainly afford it. It's good for her to be part of the family's success." And then my mother's reply, the one that shattered the last remaining fragments of my heart into dust. She just got a huge bonus. It's time she supports the family for once, instead of spending it all on that ridiculous apartment and expensive shoes. I'm thinking she should put in at least $50,000 to help get Leo's new venture capital fund off the ground. He needs a strong start. It's a family investment. $50,000. Not a contribution, a demand, an entitlement. They weren't asking me to help celebrate my brother. They were billing me for his success. They were levying a tax on my own. My phone buzzed with a call from my best friend and colleague, Sarah. Her voice was tight with anger. "You are not going to believe this," she said, dispensing with hellos. "Your brother just poached our contact at Regent Tech. He used your name, Christina. He told their marketing director that you sent him, that you personally vouched for him, and wanted him to set up a meeting for his new investment firm." I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. It was the third time he'd done it. using my network, my reputation, the connections I had spent years building with integrity as his personal Rolodex. And your parents think you should give him 50 grand for the privilege of him stealing from you? Sarah scoffed. That's not a family, Christina. That's a protection racket, and you're the one being shaken down. The words hung in the air, sharp and true. What exactly had they done for me lately? What had they ever done for me, besides remind me of my place? Always in the background, always second best, always the ATM. My mother called that evening. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used when she was about to ask for something big, a tone that used to make me feel warm and needed, but now just sounded like a predator closing in. "Darling," she began, "your father and I were talking about Leo's future. He's on the cusp of something truly great, but these things require capital. That bonus of yours, it came at the perfect time. It's like fate." I stayed silent, letting her weave her web. I wanted to hear all of it. I needed to. "We think $50,000 would be a perfect amount. It's not a gift, of course. It's an investment in your brother, in the family name. When he succeeds, we all succeed." "My bonus," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, "for my work, for the Horizon campaign." "And what is work for, if not to help family?" she countered smoothly, the guilt trip polished from years of practice. "Christina, you're 33. You're not married. You don't have children. What else are you going to spend it on? More shoes? Your brother has a wife, a future. He needs this. It's your duty to support that. You don't have a family, so you should pay for his." That was the unspoken message. That was my true value to them, an unencumbered source of funds. And that was it, the snap. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it was a quiet, cold, and utterly terrifying click deep inside my soul. The part of me that had spent a lifetime craving their approval, that had bent over backwards to be seen, to be loved, simply died. It withered away in an instant, and in its place, something new and hard and sharp began to grow. The hurt was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was a clarity so profound it was almost peaceful. I saw them for exactly what they were, users, and I saw myself as their primary resource, a well they kept drawing from, assuming it would never run dry. "Let me consider it, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I need to look over my finances." "Don't take too long, dear," she warned, a hint of steel in her sweet tone. "Opportunities like this don't wait." "Oh, I know," I said, looking out at the glittering, indifferent city. "I won't." I hung up the phone. The tears I thought would come never did. Instead, I walked over to my bookshelf, to a row of unassuming photo albums in journals I hadn't touched in years, and I began to prepare. They wanted an investment. I was about to show them the cost of doing business with me. For the next week, my apartment transformed from a home into a war room. The hurt had receded, replaced by a cold, methodical focus I usually reserved for my most challenging marketing campaigns. If my family saw me as a business transaction, then I would treat this as one. And every good strategy begins with data. The emotion was a liability. The facts were my armor. I pulled a heavy, dust-covered storage box from the back of my closet, the tape groaning as I cut it open. A box I hadn't opened in years. It was my archive of a life lived in the margins. The air smelled of old paper and fading ink. Inside were journals with their cheap, locked bindings, old photo albums, and manila folders filled with receipts and bank statements I had meticulously kept since I was a teenager. I'd always been organized, a trait my parents called obsessive. Now I saw it for what it was, a defense mechanism. It was proof of my existence, a record they couldn't rewrite. I didn't act on impulse. I began to build a case, piece by painstaking piece. First came the photo albums. I laid them open across my large dining room table. Leo's albums were thick, overflowing with professionally taken photos of lavish birthday parties, sports trophies, and proud family moments. There was Leo at 5 with a real-life pony his grandfather had rented. Leo at 10 with a mountain of presents that obscured his face. Leo at 16 being handed the keys to a brand new Mustang, a giant red bow on the hood. The flashbulbs in the photos seemed to capture the golden glow of their adoration for him. Then I opened mine. The pages were mostly empty, the stiff black paper staring back at me. A few scattered photos, me with a store-bought cupcake, the frosting slightly smeared. Me at my high school graduation, standing alone in the garden because my parents were stuck in traffic after attending Leo's lacrosse practice. The contrast wasn't just stark, it was brutal. It was a visual representation of their priorities, a story told in empty spaces. Next, I turned to the journals. My teenage handwriting was a painful reminder of how long this had been going on. I steeled myself against the wave of remembered sadness. I wasn't there to mourn the girl who wrote those words. I was there to gather evidence for the woman she had become. October 12th, my birthday. Mom and Dad took Leo to a Yankees game. They said they'd be back for dinner. They came home at 11. They forgot. Grandma called to wish me a happy birthday, and I had to pretend they were in the other room. I didn't linger on the pain. I scanned for facts, for dates, for events. I was an archaeologist digging up the bones of a neglected childhood, not to put them on display, but to assemble a skeleton of truth. But the centerpiece of my project, the weapon I was forging, was the spreadsheet. I opened a new Excel file, entitled it The Miller Family Investment Ledger. For 2 straight nights, fueled by black coffee and a simmering, controlled rage, I populated it. I went through old bank statements I had saved digitally, credit card bills, and the financial records my parents had once asked me to organize for them years ago because I was so good with numbers. I was good with numbers, and now their numbers were going to be their undoing. I created 2 columns, investment in Leo Miller and investment in Christina Miller. Under Leo's column, the numbers flowed freely. Private school tuition, $350,000. Harvard undergraduate degree, fully paid, including study abroad programs and a generous allowance, $280,000. Down payment on his first condo with Tiffany, $100,000. The failed tech startup he launched at 25, funded by my father cashing in bonds that were meant for both our futures, $150,000. Cars, vacations to Europe, bespoke suits for his meetings. The total climbed into the 7 figures, a staggering monument to their blind favoritism. Under my column, the entries were sparse and pathetic. State university tuition, of which I paid for half with academic scholarships and part-time jobs waitressing, $60,000. A used 1998 Honda Civic for graduation, which broke down 2 years later, $8,000. A loan for my first apartment security deposit, which I paid back with 5% interest in 6 months, $5,000. The numbers didn't lie. They told a story of profound, calculated inequality. This wasn't just parental favoritism. This was a financial strategy. They had poured all their resources into their blue-chip stock, their son, while I was treated as a low-yield bond, reliable, steady, and utterly ignored. And now that their prize investment was underperforming, they were coming to cash me in to cover his losses. As I stared at the final, staggering totals on the screen, the last vestiges of guilt or obligation I felt towards them evaporated like mist in a harsh sun. This wasn't a family dynamic. This was a business model, and I was an unacknowledged creditor who was about to call in their emotional debt. My evidence was compiled. My case was airtight. Now I just needed a plan. The plan began with a name I hadn't thought of in years, Mr. Harrison. He was my grandmother's lawyer, a kind, old-school gentleman whose office smelled of leather and lemon polish. He always had butterscotch candies and a heavy crystal dish on his desk. My grandmother Eleanor was the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me. She was the one who taught me to save receipts, to keep a journal, to document your life, as she used to say, because your memory is precious, and some people have a convenient way of forgetting. She passed away 5 years ago, and I hadn't spoken to Mr. Harrison since the funeral, where my mother had made a scene about the small portion of jewelry Eleanor had left me. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed his office number. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Maybe just some advice. Maybe just to talk to someone who remembered the woman who had been my only real ally in a family of strangers. His secretary put me through immediately. Christina Miller, Mr. Harrison's voice crackled over the phone, warmer and more familiar than I expected. I was wondering when you might call. His words sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't a normal greeting. You were? Your grandmother was a very wise woman, Christina. She was also a brilliant strategist. She saw this coming. Not the specifics, perhaps, but the pattern, the entitlement. She knew your parents' nature. He paused, and I could hear the rustle of papers on his end. She made certain provisions in her estate planning. In her will, she left you her personal effects, her jewelry. But that wasn't the real inheritance. That was just a diversion to satisfy your mother's expectations. I held my breath, my knuckles white on the receiver, my apartment suddenly feeling very small. Eleanor set up an irrevocable trust fund for you, Christina. She funded it over 20 years with discreet investments your father knew nothing about. She didn't want them to know, fearing they would try to control it or, worse, pressure you into giving it to your brother. My mind was reeling, trying to process the words. A trust fund? This was the stuff of movies, not my life. There was a condition, however, he continued, his voice calm and measured, a very specific one. She stipulated that you could only gain full, unrestricted access to the principal of the trust under one of two conditions, your 40th birthday or the day you could prove complete financial and personal independence from your family. To her, the ultimate symbol of that independence was owning a significant property in your own name, purchased without their financial assistance or influence. I sank onto my sofa, the spreadsheet on my laptop suddenly seeming so small. My grandmother had left me more than money. She had left me a roadmap to freedom and a weapon. This wasn't just a safety net. It was a brilliantly designed endgame. How much? I whispered, the words barely audible. As of this morning's market close, Mr. Harrison said calmly, the Eleanor Miller Trust for Christina is valued at $2,547,000. I started to cry them, not tears of sadness or anger, but of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. A dam inside me that had been holding back years of loneliness finally broke. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. My grandmother had been watching over me, protecting me all this time. She also left a letter, Mr. Harrison said gently, a letter to be opened by you or to be read in a legal proceeding, should you ever need it. She called it your insurance policy. The next day, I was in his mahogany-paneled office. The butterscotch candies were still in the crystal dish. He handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope. My grandmother's elegant cursive swirled across the front. For my Christina, when you need it most. I opened it. The letter wasn't just an explanation, it was a validation of everything I had ever felt, a voice from the past confirming I was not crazy. "My dearest Christina," it began. "If you are reading this, it means the time has come for you to stand on your own 2 feet, not just financially, but emotionally. I have watched your parents my entire life. I love my daughter, but I am not blind to her flaws, nor to your father's blinding arrogance. They see in Leo a reflection of themselves and their ambitions. In you, my darling, they see a quiet competence that they find useful but do not value. They will use your sense of duty, your good heart, against you. They will call it family when they mean obligation. They will ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Do not do it. This money is not a gift. It is your armor. Use it to build a life so full and so beautiful that their small, narrow world cannot touch it. The property clause is not a hurdle. It is a key. The moment you turn that key in a lock that is yours and yours alone, you are free. You owe them nothing but the courtesy you would show a stranger. You are the true legacy of this family, Christina. You have my strength, my spirit, and my love. Now go and claim what is yours." I folded the letter, my hands steady now. The tears were dry. The path forward was illuminated, as if she had left a string of lights for me in the dark. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to follow my grandmother's last instructions. I was going to set myself free. The decision was instant. A quiet fire, ignited by my grandmother's words, was now burning brightly and cleanly inside me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rescue, my own. It was about honoring the one person who had fought for me when I didn't even know I needed a champion. I spent the next 48 hours online, not looking at marketing reports, but at real estate listings. Not in the city, with its concrete canyons and echoing loneliness, but far away from it. I found a 4-bedroom house nestled on the shore of a crystal-clear lake in upstate New York. It had a wrap-around wooden deck, a stone fireplace, and wide windows that seemed to pull the sunlight and the water right into the living room. It was the opposite of my sterile city apartment. It felt like a place where a person could breathe. It was a sanctuary. With Mr. Harrison's help, things moved at a speed that felt surreal. My bonus of $82,000 was the perfect, unimpeachable down payment. It was money I had earned, money my family already knew about and coveted, which made it the perfect tool. Mr. Harrison arranged a temporary advance from the now accessible trust to cover the rest. The offer was accepted. The mortgage, with my excellent credit and substantial assets, was approved in a day. I signed the papers in a quiet office, each stroke of the pen feeling like a declaration of independence. This wasn't just a house, it was the key to my freedom. It was the fulfillment of my grandmother's final, brilliant plan. That Saturday, I drove the 3 hours from the city, the windows down, the music loud. The keys felt heavy and real in my hand. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing. I stood on that wooden deck, the scent of pine needles and damp earth in the air, watching sunlight dance across the lake's surface. For the first time in my adult life, I felt a profound sense of peace, of belonging. This was mine. No one could touch it. No one could take it away. And then I took out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I wasn't trying to start a war, but I knew one was coming. This was my first shot, fired from a position of strength. I took a simple photo, just me, smiling, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes, with my feet up on the railing of my new deck, a glass of wine in my hand. The blue, endless lake stretched out behind me. I posted it to my social media, the same place where I'd seen my brother's celebration. I added one single line of text: birthday gift to myself. I put my phone's screen down on the railing, turned off the ringer, and for a full hour, I simply breathed. I watched a hawk circle overhead. I listened to the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. I let the peace of the place seep into my bones, reinforcing the armor my grandmother had given me. When I finally turned the phone over, the screen was a blinding constellation of notifications. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages. The barrage was relentless, a digital assault of pure, unfiltered entitlement. 8 of the missed calls were from my mother, all within the last 15 minutes. The texts were a chaotic symphony of outrage, confusion, and demands. From my mother, "Christina, call me back immediately. What is this? A house? Where did you get the money for a house? This is not funny." From my father, "This is completely irresponsible behavior. You are putting the family in a very difficult position. We need to talk. Now." From Leo, "What the hell, Chris? You buy a house and don't tell anyone? Mom is having a full-blown panic attack because of you. You need to fix this." From Tiffany, "Christina, we're all so worried about you. This is so out of character. Please let us know you're okay. Your mother is a wreck." The fakest of them all. "People are asking questions we can't answer. How do you think this makes us look?" Not a single message asked if I was happy. Not a single one said congratulations. Their immediate reaction wasn't joy for me, but anger at what my independence meant for them. It meant a loss of control. It meant the ATM was closing its doors. I read each message, and I felt nothing. The cold, clear certainty inside me had become a shield. Their panic wasn't my problem anymore. Their manufactured emergencies were no longer my responsibility. I silenced my phone and slipped it into my pocket. The sun was beginning to set, painting the water in shades of rose and gold. I settled into an Adirondack chair, the same glass of wine in my hand, and I watched the beautiful, silent end of the day. They had started the war, but I was the one with the ammunition, and I was on my own territory now. The ceasefire lasted less than 48 hours. On Monday afternoon, the gleaming glass doors of my corporate office slid open and my father strode in. Robert Miller didn't walk. He commanded space, expecting it to part before him. Dressed in a tailored suit that screamed old money and entitlement, he radiated an aura of authority that turned heads across the entire open-plan office. He looked completely out of place and utterly sure of himself. Sarah caught my eye from across the room, her expression a mixture of alarm and "I told you so." She mouthed the words "code red" before discreetly making herself scarce, a loyal friend who knew when to provide backup and when to disappear. I intercepted him near the reception desk, my heart pounding a steady, angry rhythm against my ribs. I would not let him humiliate me here. This place was my sanctuary, too. "Dad," I said, my voice low and firm, "this is my workplace. This is inappropriate." "Then you should conduct yourself like a professional who honors her family obligations," he boomed, his voice carrying across the nearby cubicles. Heads popped up over monitors like prairie dogs. I could feel the curious glances like physical pricks on my skin. I grabbed his elbow, my grip surprisingly strong, and guided him toward an empty glass-walled meeting room. The walk felt like a mile under the silent scrutiny of my colleagues. "Lower your voice," I hissed. "What do you want?" He didn't sit. He stood over me, using his height and his palpable fury to intimidate, a tactic that had worked for 33 years. It didn't work today. I stood my ground, my posture straight, my gaze unwavering. "Your mother hasn't stopped crying since Saturday," he accused, his voice a low growl. "Is that what you wanted? To punish us because we missed one birthday? To throw a childish tantrum with a house? The casual, deliberate cruelty of his words, one birthday, childish tantrum, ignited something molten inside me. One birthday? 20 years of them, Dad? Try graduations. Try every single achievement you ever dismissed as nice, honey. You always exaggerate. He waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away an annoying fly. The point is, this stunt with the house is selfish and reckless. That bonus money was meant to help your brother. It was meant to help the family achieve something real. It was my bonus, I stated, my voice dangerously calm, each word a carefully placed stone. For my work, and I have other plans for it, plans that don't involve funding Leo's latest failure. His face turned a dangerous shade of red. What other plans could possibly be more important than family? He thundered. Before I could answer, my desk phone, visible through the glass, began to flash with an urgent, pre-programmed signal from my top client. A crisis. Salvation in the form of work. I have to take this, I said, turning to leave. It was the truth, and it was also the perfect escape. This conversation isn't finished, Christina, he warned, his voice shaking with rage. Actually, I said, not looking back as I pulled the heavy glass door closed, it is. I closed the door on his sputtering fury and walked back to my desk, my hands trembling, but my voice perfectly steady as I dialed the client. I spent the next 3 hours putting out a corporate fire, navigating a PR crisis that could have cost the company millions. When it was over, my CEO, Mr. Hurd, Sterling, walked over to my desk personally. Extraordinary work, Christina, he said, his voice full of genuine admiration. You just saved us. That's why you get the big bonuses. He smiled, a warm, genuine expression, and for a moment I saw what a proud father might look like. The contrast was staggering. At work, I was valued, respected, essential. At home, I was an afterthought, an obligation, a walking bank account. The real escalation, the move that showed me this was no longer just about anger, but about a calculated strategy, came that night. It arrived via a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, a notorious gossip who always framed her interrogations as concern. "Christina, dear," she cooed, "I just spoke to your mother." Oh, she's beside herself with worry. We all are. I'm fine, Aunt Patricia, I said, my voice flat, bracing myself for the real reason for her call. Well, it's just this house, and buying it so suddenly. Tiffany was saying... She paused for dramatic effect, savoring the moment. She was saying that she's been worried about your mental state for a while now, that you've seemed so withdrawn and unstable. She told your mother that maybe you're having some sort of breakdown, and that's why you're making such reckless financial decisions. The phone felt slick in my hand. Tiffany. Of course, sweet, smiling, manipulative Tiffany, my brother's wife. She wasn't just a passive bystander. She was an active player. She was planting the seeds, framing my independence as insanity. Patricia, my aunt continued, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. She thinks you're jealous of Leo's success and that it's finally pushed you over the edge. Your father is talking to a lawyer, just to, explore their options, to protect you from yourself, dear. To protect me from myself? The gaslighting was so audacious, so utterly shameless, that all I could do was laugh, a cold, sharp sound that held no humor. They weren't just angry, they were building a narrative. They were preparing for a different kind of battle, one fought with whispers and legal jargon, and they had just revealed their strategy. The official declaration of war arrived a week later, not via a dramatic phone call or a shouting match, but with the quiet, mundane efficiency of the United States Postal Service. It was a thick, legal-sized envelope delivered by certified mail, requiring my signature. The mail carrier, a cheerful man named Sal, who always had a treat for the dogs in my building, looked at me with his usual smile, oblivious to the fact that he was handing me a grenade. My stomach twisted as I signed the form. I knew instinctively what it was. I closed my apartment door and leaned against it, the envelope feeling heavy, malevolent in my hand. I walked to my kitchen counter and laid it on the cool granite, staring at the return address, a law firm I didn't recognize. It was like looking at a snake coiled on my floor. For a moment, a flicker of the old Christina, the one who would do anything to keep the peace, surfaced. A voice whispered, "Just call them, apologize, give them the money, make it all go away." I took a deep breath, and the scent of the lake house, of pine and clean air and freedom, filled my memory. I pushed that weak voice down. That Christina was gone. She had died on her 33rd birthday. My hands were surprisingly steady as I slid a letter opener under the flap. The document inside was dense with legal jargon, but the words at the top of the first page leaped out, stark and horrifying, designed to shock and awe. In the matter of the conservatorship of Christina Miller, they had actually done it. My family, my mother, my father, and my brother had filed a petition with the court. They were seeking to have me declared mentally incompetent. They were asking for legal control over my person and, more importantly, my estate. The legal term they used was custody, as if I were a child. They were trying to take everything. I read on, my blood turning to ice. The petition was a work of fiction, a masterpiece of manipulation crafted by a lawyer who was clearly skilled in twisting reality into a weapon. It painted a portrait of a daughter who had become increasingly erratic and delusional. It cited my sudden and extravagant purchase of a high-value property as Exhibit A of my unsound financial judgment and manic spending. It included a signed affidavit from Tiffany expressing her deep concern over my social withdrawal and paranoid statements, even fabricating a conversation where I had allegedly claimed my company was out to get me. They even twisted my career success against me, suggesting that the pressures of my high-stress job had led to a severe psychological decline. They claimed my silence and lack of communication were not a reaction to their behavior, but proof of my instability. The petition requested that my father, Robert Miller, be appointed my temporary conservator, granting him the power to manage my finances, make my medical decisions, and even sell my assets for my own protection. He would have control over my salary, my investments, everything. I would be an adult with an allowance, a prisoner in my own life. It was a legal maneuver designed to strip me of my autonomy, my assets, and my dignity. It was their checkmate. They believed that by dragging this into a courtroom, by branding me as hysterical and unstable, they could publicly humiliate me into submission. They thought I would crumble. They thought I would be too ashamed to fight back, too afraid of the stigma. They thought I would surrender to save face. They had catastrophically, fatally misjudged me. They didn't know about the spreadsheet. They didn't know about the journals. And they certainly didn't know about the ghost in my corner, my grandmother Eleanor, and the insurance policy she had left behind. I picked up my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Sarah. "They're trying to put me in a conservatorship," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion, as if I were reading a weather report. I heard her sharp intake of breath, followed by a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. "Those monsters!" she finally spat. Okay, we fight this. I'm coming over. What do you need? Do you need a place to stay? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Her immediate, unconditional support was a lifeline. I'm fine, Sarah, I said, and for the first time, it was completely true. But thank you. I know who to call. The second call was to Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, I said, looking at the legal papers spread before me like a declaration of surrender they expected me to sign. It's Christina. My family has filed a petition. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then a deep, weary sigh. I see, he said, his voice laced with a grim sort of resignation. So they've chosen to make it official. Very well. His tone shifted then, becoming crisp and professional, the sound of a general preparing for a battle he knew he would win. Don't worry, Christina. This is not a battle they are prepared to fight. Your grandmother anticipated this level of greed. This is exactly the kind of proceeding she wrote the letter for. Send a copy of the petition to my office immediately. It's time we read them her letter. The fear that had been coiling in my stomach finally unspooled, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They had chosen the battlefield. They had chosen the weapons. But they had no idea I was arriving with an arsenal. The courtroom wouldn't be my humiliation. It would be their reckoning. The courtroom was beige and soulless, smelling faintly of stale coffee and desperation. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly, sterile glow on everything. It felt like a stage set for a tragedy. My family was already there, seated at the petitioner's table. They were dressed for their roles with theatrical precision. My mother, in a modest gray dress, clutched a tissue in her hand, her eyes already red-rimmed and puffy. My father looked stern and concerned, his jaw set, the very picture of a patriarch forced into a difficult but necessary action. Leo and Tiffany sat behind them, their faces masks of worried sympathy, occasionally whispering to each other and casting sad, pitying glances my way. They looked like a Norman Rockwell painting of a loving family in crisis. The performance was sickeningly perfect. I sat at the respondents' table with Mr. Harrison. I wore a simple, dark blue sheath dress, the color of confidence and stability. I felt an odd sense of calm, the kind that comes after the storm has already hit and you are simply dealing with the wreckage. There was nothing left to be afraid of. The worst they could do, they had already tried to do. Their lawyer, a slick, self-satisfied man named Dr. Evans, with a plastic smile and overly shiny shoes, stood to address the judge. Judge Davis was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and an expression that suggested she had seen every form of human deceit imaginable. She looked impatient. Your Honor, Dr. Evans began, his voice dripping with false empathy, we are here today with heavy hearts. The Miller family loves their daughter, Christina. But over the past few months, they have watched with growing alarm as her behavior has become increasingly erratic and concerning, culminating in a series of decisions that threaten to destroy her financial future. He wove a masterful tale, a tapestry of half-truths and outright lies. He portrayed me as a lonely, isolated workaholic who had finally cracked under the immense pressure of a high-powered career. He described my tireless dedication not as a strength, but as a symptom of a deep-seated unhappiness in a disconnect from reality. This unhappiness, he continued, gesturing towards me as if I were a piece of faulty evidence, has manifested in a classic cry for help, a sudden, impulsive, and financially catastrophic decision to purchase a multi-million-dollar property she cannot afford, liquidating her savings and putting her future in jeopardy. He was lying, of course. He had no access to my true financial picture. He was building his entire case on their assumptions, on their belief that I was just a moderately successful marketer, not the architect of a carefully planned financial life. It is our belief, supported by anecdotal evidence from those closest to her, that Mrs. Miller is suffering from a manic episode, or perhaps a breakdown induced by extreme stress and jealousy over her brother's recent successes. I saw Leo shift uncomfortably at the mention of his name, a flicker of something, shame, fear, in his eyes. My father just nodded grimly, as if confirming a sad but obvious diagnosis. My mother was called to the stand. Her performance was worthy of an Oscar. Tears streamed down her face as she described my withdrawal from the family, her voice breaking at all the right moments. "She won't answer our calls," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with the pristine tissue. "She's become so secretive, so angry. We're just so worried she's going to hurt herself. That house, it's not safe for her to be out there all alone in her condition. We just want to get her the help she needs. We want our daughter back." Next, my father took the stand. He spoke of his responsibility as a father, his solemn duty to protect his child, even from herself. He detailed my history of being overly emotional and prone to exaggeration. He made it sound as if my entire life was a prelude to this inevitable mental collapse. It was a brutal, public dismantling of my character. Tiffany submitted her affidavit, which Dr. Evans read aloud with grave seriousness. It was filled with carefully chosen phrases about my unstable moods and increasing paranoia. It was a character assassination disguised as loving concern, and it was the most vicious of all their attacks. Through it all, I remained silent. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I met their eyes when they looked at me, my expression neutral. I watched them lie. I watched them perform. I watched them try to dismantle my life, my identity, my sanity, all for the sake of money and control. With every word they spoke, they weren't building their case, they were digging their own graves. The audience, the judge, was being filled with righteous indignation, just as I had planned. The rage in the room was palpable, and it was all directed at me, the ungrateful, unstable daughter. The stage was perfectly set for the final act. When Dr. Evans finally rested his case with a confident flourish, the air in the courtroom was thick with pity for the Miller family. He had painted a convincing picture of a family in pain, forced to make an impossible choice. Judge Davis looked at me with a tired, almost sad expression. It was the look I had seen my whole life, the look reserved for a difficult, emotional woman who just couldn't handle things. Then Mr. Harrison stood up. He was calm, his movements deliberate. He didn't begin with an emotional rebuttal. He began with cold, hard facts. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the sentimental fog. "The petitioner's entire case rests on the assumption that my client, Miss Christina Miller, is financially reckless and mentally unstable. We intend to prove, with irrefutable, documented evidence, that not only is Miss Miller one of the most financially solvent and mentally sound individuals in this room, but that this petition is a malicious, predatory, and fraudulent attempt to seize control of her assets out of pure greed." A murmur went through the small gallery. Dr. Evans scoffed, rolling his eyes. My father's face tightened into a mask of indignation. "First," Mr. Harrison said, "let's address the matter of financial recklessness." He placed a thick, bound document on the witness stand. "This is a certified financial statement for Miss Miller, prepared last week. It details her salary, her stock portfolio, and her investments. Far from being unable to afford the property in question, Miss Miller could have purchased it twice over in cash without touching her primary investments." He then turned to a large screen he had set up. The first slide that appeared was my Excel spreadsheet, professionally formatted and titled in bold letters, "The Miller Family Investment Ledger, a 20-year analysis." This, Your Honor, is a document prepared by Miss Miller herself, tracking over 2 decades of family financial distributions, compiled from bank statements, tax records, and receipts. He calmly walked the judge through the 2 columns, his laser pointer highlighting the 7-figure investment in Leo Miller versus the paltry sums spent on me. This petition is not about protecting Christina's assets. It is about their frustration that for the first time, she has invested in herself instead of funding her brother's lifestyle and his series of failed business ventures. This petition is not about protecting Christina's assets. It is about their frustration that for the first time, she has invested in herself instead of funding her brother's lifestyle and his series of failed business ventures. My family stared at the screen, their faces draining of color. They were seeing their secret history, their private shame, laid bare in black and white for a stranger to judge. Next, Mr. Harrison presented the photo albums. He showed the judge the pictures of Leo's lavish parties, then flipped through the nearly empty pages of mine. "A picture is worth 1,000 words, Your Honor. These albums speak volumes about where this family's priorities have always been." Then he said, "The petitioners have also made claims regarding Miss Miller's professional conduct and her relationships. To that end, I'd like to call a witness to the stand, Mr. David Chen." Leo's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. David Chen, his potential business partner, walked confidently to the stand. Under oath, David testified that Leo had approached him using Christina's name and reputation, and that during their meetings, Leo had repeatedly disparaged his sister, calling her the family ATM and joking about how he could get her to fund his entire venture. He told me, and I quote, "She's got a soft spot for the family legacy, a little guilt trip, and she'll write any check I ask for." I ceased all business discussions with Mr. Miller after that, David concluded, looking directly at Leo with an expression of pure disgust. The courtroom was silent, the atmosphere electric. Dr. Evans looked flustered for the first time, shuffling his papers, but Mr. Harrison wasn't finished. "Finally, Your Honor," he said, his voice resonating with gravitas. "The petitioners have questioned my client's mental state. They have painted her as unstable and alone, but she is not alone. She has a guardian who has been watching over her for years, her grandmother, the late Eleanor Miller." He held up the thick, cream-colored envelope. "This is a letter written by Eleanor Miller and entrusted to me to be read in a legal proceeding such as this. Her insurance policy." Dr. Evans leaped to his feet. "Objection! Hearsay! The woman is deceased. This is theatrics." "It is a legally notarized testamentary document, counsel, as you well know," the judge snapped, her eyes flashing with interest. "Your objection is overruled. Proceed, Mr. Harrison." Mr. Harrison opened the letter, and he began to read my grandmother's words, her clear, strong voice seeming to echo in the silent room. He read about her love for me. He read about her clear-eyed assessment of my parents' flaws, my father's arrogance, my mother's manipulative nature, their shared blindness when it came to their children. He read the most damning part aloud, his eyes fixed on my parents. "I have watched my daughter and her husband pour every resource, every hope, and every ounce of affection into their son, while treating their brilliant, dutiful daughter as an afterthought. They will not see this as unfair. They will see it as their right. Should they ever attempt to control Christina or her inheritance, let this letter serve as my testimony from beyond the grave. It is not out of love or concern." It is out of a deep-seated greed and a fear of losing control over the one person in their lives who has never asked for anything and has always given everything. This petition, should it ever come to pass, is not an act of theft. When he finished, there was a profound, echoing silence. My mother let out a strangled sob, a real one this time, a sound of pure, unadulterated shame. My father stared at his hands on the table, his face the color of ash. The mask was gone. The performance was over. All that was left was the ugly, exposed truth. Mr. Harrison placed the letter on the judge's bench. The defense rests, Your Honor. Thank you for staying with me through that. You are an amazing and patient person. If you're still here, please press the like button and comment with the number 1 below, just so I know you've journeyed this far with me. Your support means more than you can imagine. Now comment with a 1 and let me tell you what happened next. Judge Davis looked down from her bench, her sharp eyes moving from the letter to my family and finally to me. The tired, sad expression she'd had before was gone, replaced by a cold, controlled anger that was far more terrifying. In all my years on this bench, she began, her voice low and cutting, each word landing with the force of a physical blow. I have seen many frivolous and misguided petitions, but rarely have I seen one so transparently malicious and predatory as this. She turned her gaze directly on my parents, who seemed to shrink under the weight of it. You have come into this courtroom and you have lied under oath. You have attempted to weaponize the legal system to commit what amounts to financial and emotional abuse against your own daughter. You have slandered her character and questioned her sanity, not out of concern for her well-being, but because she finally had the courage to spend her own hard-earned money on herself instead on your spoiled, entitled son. Each word was a hammer blow. My mother flinched as if struck, her manufactured sobs turning into genuine, ugly gasps of air. My father seemed to shrink in his chair, all his blustering authority gone, leaving only a hollow, defeated old man. Leo stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes, the golden boy tarnished beyond repair. The judge wasn't finished. The petition for conservatorship is denied with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the petitioners, Robert, Carol, and Leo Miller, to pay for all of Miss Christina Miller's legal fees associated with this case. She looked at Dr. Evans, her eyes narrowing. And counsel, I would strongly advise you to reconsider the kind of clients you choose to represent. This was an embarrassment to your profession and bordered on malicious prosecution. Dr. Evans's slick confidence had vanished. He stammered, yes, Your Honor, his face pale and sweaty. As for you, Miss Miller, the judge said, her voice softening as she looked at me, a flicker of empathy in her stern eyes, I am truly sorry you had to endure this. Your grandmother was a very wise woman. I suggest you follow her advice. She banged her gavel, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. This court is adjourned. The sound broke the spell. It was over. The aftermath was a slow-motion collapse. My family sat frozen at their table as Mr. Harrison and I gathered our papers. David Chen walked past their table without a glance and gave me a small, respectful nod on his way out. The few people in the gallery started to file out, some of them casting looks of utter contempt at my family. Their public performance had ended in public humiliation. I stood up, ready to leave. I had to walk past their table to get to the exit. For a moment, I considered saying something, a final, cutting remark, a triumphant parting shot. But when I looked at them, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't even feel anger anymore. I felt pity and a vast empty distance. They looked so small, so defeated, stripped of their arrogance and entitlement. My mother looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara, her eyes pleading, desperate. "Christina," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. The silence was more powerful than any insult I could have hurled. It was the silence of a closed door. It was the silence of a future they were no longer a part of. I held her gaze for a beat, then turned and walked away. I walked out of the beige, soulless courtroom and into the bright afternoon sun, leaving them behind in the ruins of the world they had built on my back. Mr. Harrison walked with me to the courthouse steps. "They won't bother you again," he said, a statement of fact, not reassurance. "The public record of this hearing, especially your grandmother's letter, will be a permanent stain on their reputation." I knew he was right. In their world, the world of country clubs and society dinners, appearances were everything, and their appearance had been irrevocably shattered. I took a deep breath of the fresh, clean city air. It felt like the first breath of a new life. I had walked into that courtroom as their daughter, their victim, their ATM. I walked out as Christina Miller, independent, vindicated, and finally, blessedly free. A year can change everything. I'm writing this from the deck of my lake house. It's my 34th birthday. The morning sun is painting gold streaks across the water, and the air smells of coffee and fresh-cut grass. There's a tray of fresh fruit and pastries on the table beside me, and a bucket of champagne is chilling for mimosas. The house isn't silent today. It's filled with the low hum of conversation and genuine, easy laughter from the kitchen. My life didn't just change after that day in court. It was reborn. The first few months were quiet, a necessary period of decompression. I spent weekends here, at the lake, healing. I painted walls, planted a garden, and read all the books I never had time for. I went to therapy, where I learned to distinguish the voice of my family's expectations from my own quiet, steady intuition. I learned that no is a complete sentence. My family, as Mr. Harrison predicted, disappeared. The shame was too great. I heard through the grapevine, via Aunt Patricia, who now called me for gossip instead of the other way around, that Leo's venture capital fund never got off the ground. No one wanted to invest with a man who had been publicly exposed as a fraud and a leech. My father and mother became social recluses. They had built their world around a legacy embodied by their son, and that legacy was now tarnished beyond repair. I, on the other hand, flourished. With full access to my grandmother's trust, I didn't just sit on the money. I honored her. 6 months ago, I established the Eleanor Miller Foundation, a nonprofit that provides scholarships and mentorship to talented young women in business who lack family support. We help them negotiate their first salary, build their own financial independence, and recognize their own worth long before someone else tries to define it for them. My work, my real work, is now about building up other women who, like me, were told they were second best. My chosen family is here today. Sarah is in the kitchen, orchestrating the brunch buffet with military precision. Mr. Sterling, my old CEO, who is now a mentor and friend, is down by the dock with his wife, attempting to fish. David Chen is here too. We became unlikely friends, bonded by our shared experience with my brother's duplicity. He's become a key advisor for my foundation. These are the people who see me, who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. A few weeks ago, a letter arrived, a handwritten letter on my mother's stationery. It was the first direct communication I'd had from her in a year. It wasn't eloquent. It was clumsy and full of justifications and self-pity, but buried in the paragraphs of how hard things had been for them were 3 words I never thought I would read. I am sorry. She wrote that after the hearing, she found my old, empty photo albums in the attic. For the first time, she said, she truly saw them. She saw the empty pages, and she finally understood. I don't know if it will lead to a reconciliation. Maybe not. Some wounds are too deep to ever fully heal. But it was an acknowledgement, a beginning of something, perhaps. Forgiveness is a complicated thing, and I've learned it's more about my own peace than their redemption. The sliding glass door opens and Sarah comes out with 2 glasses of mimosa. Happy birthday to the woman who taught us all how to build our own damn sanctuary, she says, her smile wide and genuine as she hands me a glass. We clink our glasses together. I look out at the sparkling water, at the life I have built, not from the ashes of my old one, but from the foundation my grandmother secretly laid for me. I am not the sum of my family's neglect. I am the product of my own resilience. Last year on my birthday, I sat alone in a sterile apartment with a single sad cupcake. Today, I am surrounded by love, by laughter, and by a future that is entirely, unequivocally my own. I finally learned that validation isn't something you beg for from others. It's something you build, brick by brick, until you have a home for your soul to live in. And my home is finally at peace. Thank you so much for listening to my entire story. I truly appreciate you. If you made it all the way to the end, you're different from most. And I'd love it if you would comment with the letter A, just so I know you were here for the whole journey. If you have any thoughts or feelings about what I've shared, please write them down. And please continue to explore the other stories on this channel. Thank you.